Korea now internationally is known as one of the most tough markets for franchising. KFC, Pizza Hut master franchise is going bankrupt. A lot of big brands are very afraid to enter Korea because
So you did work all the way up from the bottom to the management.
15-year-old, like in the back flipping burgers. And McDonald's actually, they paid for my undergrad because they saw me as kind of like a rising star.
All I'm hearing is recently, even after COVID, gyms are like closing, but then you guys are like expanding like crazy. How does that work?
I think it's kind of broken down into two parts there.
What do you think is the best way to motivate your employees or your franchisees?
The best thing you can do is just...
Before we dive in, big shout out to our sponsor, Spark Plus, Korea's leading co-working space provider who made this beautiful space available for us. Whether you're visiting Korea on a work trip and need a remote office, or you're a startup founder looking for a flexible premium workspace, Spark Plus has you covered. With over 30 locations across Seoul, you'll see their signs on some of the city's most iconic office buildings. They're really redefining the future of work in Korea. So check them out at sparkplus.kr and take your business to the next level. By the way, here at Asian Bus Code, I'll be sitting down with some of the most inspiring and fascinating founders and entrepreneurs across the hottest industries to bring you the insights you need to level up and achieve greatness. Be sure to subscribe to Asian Bus Code and stay tuned for more. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I think I cannot think of anyone else better than you when it comes to foreigners doing an awesome job with their business in Korea. Because I do think that Korea and Japan, to be fair, these two countries have this like reputation for being this like a bubble or like a black box when it comes to non-Korean or Japanese people, doing business. Would you agree with that statement in general?
Yeah, I would agree. I think if I have some experience with Japan, but obviously my business here in Korea, I think it's one of those situations where you have to kind of really intimately know like the culture and then, be able to speak the language, of course, and then understand kind of like the dynamics of operating a business here. And for that, I'm fortunate to have met my wife here, and then she's my business partner. Without her, I could absolutely not do it and not, be successful, or I would do it in a very limited capacity to what I do now.
To be clear, she is Korean.
To be clear, she's Korean. And so that, it's a significant advantage I have of doing business here is that I can really rely and depend on her.
Yeah.
And so I think, without that partnership that we have, if I were to just be a foreigner doing things here myself, there would be a lot more, roadblocks along the way that would be much more difficult to get over.
Do you speak Korean?
I speak a little, but not enough to I can get around in a taxi, I can order food, right. I can have like a very simple conversation, but not enough to go into the bank and say, hey, can we set up a checking account?
Right.
I have this business now, let me open up a business account.
Right.
So, those things, I'm not at that proficiency level, so.
And what exactly is the business that you're running at the moment?
So if you know F45 Training, so it's a global fitness franchise. I was at business school in New York City, went to Columbia, doing my MBA and kind of tried a bunch of different fitness concepts because I like to take care of my health. Ended up stumbling on F45, fell in love with it, came to Korea. There wasn't one open at the time. And what I kind of saw in the market was, hey, you have these like big box gyms that are open. They're kind of a little bit grungy. Generally, it's like you're walking into the center and you see this very tan Korean dude, like super cut, taking a body profile picture, and vice versa for women, like nice bikini photo. And that's kind of what Korea has for its fitness options. That or like PT or Pilates. There's not a lot of variety that you get in the US.
So for people who might not be familiar with F45 style of training, people have heard of CrossFit.
Yeah.
But how would you describe F45 for those who have no idea?
So I would, if you're familiar with HIIT style training, so HIIT is high intensity interval training. So think of it as like, short bursts of exercise in a circuit style course. But the F itself stands for functional fitness, and then the 45s it's 45-minute sessions generally. And then that's supported by, we like to say that F45's kind of three key pillars is, innovation, results, and community. The innovation is the sense that, hey, they have this algorithm that develops a new workout every single day. So no workout's the same. So you're not getting bored of the workouts because it's so, repetitive. And then it's displayed to a TV screen so you can kind of follow along. And then the results is the workout itself is designed like a science-based approach and designed by these professionals based in, US headquarters in Austin, Texas, and then in Sydney, Australia. And they say, okay, hey, if we're going to take this general populace, the people that come in, like how do we kind of build them up and progress them along so that they actually achieve results? Because you come in with one motivation, I come in with a different motivation. And so we can use this program to achieve our different results. And then the last piece of it that's particularly important is the community aspect. So whenever you're coming into an F45 center and most boutique fitness concepts, you feel that sense of community, and that's what keeps you coming back.
One interesting observation that I could make about sort of like the fitness industry in Korea. First of all, I think that Korean people actually work out a lot because I do see a lot of gyms. But then all I'm hearing is recently, over the course of past few years, even after COVID, gyms are like closing, right? And people are not into going to gyms anymore. But what I find interesting about these like a boutique fitness centers like, F45, they're actually on the rise. So what do you think the difference is when there seems to be like oversaturation of the so-called gyms that are like slowly closing down, but then you guys are like expanding like crazy. So how does that work?
I mean, I think it's kind of broken down into two parts there. It's like the one part is more like a consumer trend. So the consumer trend just globally is, there's a lot more, even post-COVID, there's a lot more focus on health, but health is like a lifestyle choice. And then as part of that, also like the social element to that. And so you're going to see like, globally, there's more like run clubs on the rise. It used to be in the past that you just have individual participation in running. I'm training for a race, therefore I go run along the park by myself. But now you see this like increasing global trend of like, let's run as a community together. And you see that in Korea as well. And then also, the rise of boutique fitness. Even in the US, if you look at the US, 20 years ago, it used to be, roughly like 10%. So if you're comparing number of gyms out there to include boutique fitness studios, it was like, I would say, don't quote me on these figures, but like about 10% of the US number of gyms was allocated towards boutique fitness. Now that number is like around 47, 48% of the market. And then the other 52, 53% is big box gyms, or, what they call like high value, low price gyms, or kind of these mega sized gyms. In Korea, it's still like single digit percentage. So we'd expect that to rise over time. Not just F45, like, F45, we've had great success. First location came in 2019. And then now we're at 58 locations, and still growing. So it's been pretty massive here. And I think it was more like we were able to kind of capture that because there was a gap in the market. And then Koreans, I feel naturally like the consumer base here is like very, very social, very communal. And then it's just something that necessarily wasn't here in the market. And then now there's this excitement behind it. And then the consumer kind of tends to run with that. And then the second part is, I think, Korea has a tendency, I feel, to oversaturate. And what I mean by that is, if we take, the big box gyms in the market, or if you look at CrossFit's a pretty good case study as well. CrossFit has a lot of fluctuation in Korea because CrossFit model is a license model. So you can just open up any type of gym. You just have to pay me a license fee of like, I think it's like $500 a month to use the CrossFit trademark. Generally, when they say, okay, pay a licensing fee, it gets access to that specific trademark.
Right.
And then generally there's some like, for instance, in CrossFit's case, you could get access to this portal that says, hey, here's how you can level yourself up. But that's where the support stops. Whereas in a franchise system is like, okay, here you're going to buy into the franchise system itself, and then we're going to structure everything. So every space that you open has to look exactly like this. And so we have like, your typical floor plans, what the standard floor layout looks out, what the branding looks like, what the marketing looks like. And then we give you the operating playbook.
Just the consistency that no matter wherever you go, it's always the same thing.
Exactly. And so you see that's the difference between like F45 in Korea and CrossFit in Korea. CrossFit is a bunch of independent gym owners that are using the CrossFit name as a license. And then you may walk into one CrossFit gym, but then you're going to walk into one, a few blocks away, and it's going to be completely different look and feel, completely different vibe based off of that gym owner or that CrossFit box owner's preference.
Right.
Whereas F45 is going to be very consistent experience. You're going to come in, you're going to have the red, white, and blue branding colors. You're going to have the one wall that has a prominent F45 logo. And then behind that, you're going to have pretty consistent marketing.
Even the quality of the trainers are kind of all at a similar level.
And then the same thing with here is like your CrossFit does deliver CrossFit style workouts. But again, one studio may run it a little bit different. Whereas F45, we have a very strict, like, this is today's workout program, if no matter where you are in the world. So if you train in Seoul today, you have a friend in New York City, they're going to be doing the same workout that you're going to be doing, just the time difference, and so.
Interesting. So I like how you just casually threw out a number like, oh, we just had 58, shops open in like 2 years, and you're very nonchalant about it. But I don't think it's that easy to pull off, like to expand that quickly. And you're now starting another business called FS8.
Yeah.
What's that one?
So it's owned by F45's parent company. And so it's a Pilates concept. So Pilates, tone, yoga mix. And it's a 50-minute workout where they kind of combine those elements using the same technology that F45 deploys. We tried it out in Australia. We tried it out in the US, and we kind of fell in love with the product as kind of a secondary aspect to our business with F45, because we see a lot of, synergies across, but then it appeals to a completely different consumer base. Your typical F45 person is somebody who kind of wants a little bit more aggressive of a workout, and then they want to be able to sweat, and they want to be able to do it with one another, and then they'll do it like 3, 4, 5 times a week. Some members are a little bit maniacs with it, and they'll do 2 to 3 times per day. Whereas your FS8 consumer is like your typical like, Pilates yoga girl who wants to come in, something a little bit more casual, so maybe 1 or 2 times per week, but is willing to pay a little bit more premium price point for that premium kind of look and feel. And so again, the consumer base is a little bit different, but the way the business model operates is very, very similar. And so you can say, okay, hey, we have this mid to senior level management that we can oversee both of these concepts relatively easy.
Right. So I'm not an expert by no means when it comes to this whole franchise model, but I think a lot of people are curious about it because, even in Korea, where at a societal level, you wouldn't exactly say this is the most entrepreneurially motivated group of people here, right? And Korean people's idea of I want to do my own business is like opening their own coffee shop. To me, it's like shrouded in not exactly secrecy, but people just don't know how this thing operates. So would you say there's a difference between how the franchise model works in places like the US versus is anything to watch out for in Korea? Is there any difference, or is it broadly similar?
Yeah, so I think I would, yes, like largely yes. I would say the Korea legislation behind franchising was actually adopted from the US and kind of been influenced by different factors.
Interesting.
I think, in Korea and the US, what you have is you have what's called an FDD, so a franchise disclosure document that actually kind of lists everything out. It can range anywhere from like 40 pages to like 80, 90 pages long of everything about that franchise. And it's essentially saying, hey, if you want to franchise out your system, you have to produce these disclosure documents so that anybody that's looking at becoming a franchisee should have every information about you, whether or not you have, pending lawsuits, anything, legal actions against you. What is the range of what it's going to cost? From the cheapest to the most expensive. What are all the fees associated? Where do those fees get used? What type of support are you going to provide? What type of support are you not going to provide? So that they have a little bit more of an informed decision, which I think is great. However, I would say the kind of divergence between the two is Korea historically, it's still a very young new country and there's a rapid development. And with that, historically, there's been bad actors. And because of those bad actors, some of the legislation that's been passed has actually harmed the industry. So it's been like Korea now internationally is known as one of the most tough markets for franchising. And you can see some pretty high profile cases in franchise industry, like KFC, most recently Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut master franchise is going bankrupt here because of like a little bit of the nuances of the Korean legislation and not disclosing some of their margin profile and their ingredient cost, which is something that is very typical as part of the business model, particularly in food and beverage anywhere in the world. But in Korea, it's such a sticking point because historically in the past, there's been franchise operators who have then said, okay, hey, you're going to only pay like a 3% royalty. It's going to be very cheap for you. You're going to open up the door and then say, you have to buy chicken from me exclusively. But then,
okay.
And so that's a pretty typical arrangement because what ended up happening is the idea is that across 300 locations, I can source chicken and buy it at a much cheaper rate. But however, there's cost involved for me to do that. So I have to hire somebody to go out there and source. So that's labor costs. They have to drive their car around and do all these meetings. And so that's transportation, food and entertainment cost. And then plus for this effort, I should get some profitability from it. However, historically, there's been kind of abuse of power in Korea. And so, say you're required to buy a chicken from me, and then you think, okay, the only cost that I'm going to be giving is my 3% royalty. But next thing you know, all of a sudden you're paying $2 per chicken.
Right.
And then I say, you know what?
Yeah.
I want more profit for me. So now you're going to pay $4 per chicken, whereas you can go to the local grocery store and probably buy for $3.
So that's not really communicated.
Yeah. And so it's
upfront. It's all this like hidden costs.
Yeah. So like hidden cost, and then essentially it's not necessarily that it's so much not disclosed, because there's brands that disclose it as required, but just, for instance, this is considered a trade secret in the US. So the US is not required to disclose it, whereas in Korea, you have to get pretty detailed about where's the margin going, where are you making it from, whereas that's considered a trade secret and too much to disclose.
Yeah.
I guess there's a little bit more trust in the US than there would be in Korea in terms of that. In terms of that, people, that say you have a McDonald's franchise, McDonald's franchisees are going to trust that McDonald's is going to give them the best deal, even with the profit margin that they get from supplying the ingredients to them. Whereas in Korea, that may not be the case. The sentiment here is that we should be mistrusting of the franchisor and then kind of question what's happening.
Right. So the government is trying to protect more of the franchisees.
Yeah, so it's very that's why a lot of big brands are very afraid to enter Korea, because the legislation here is so favorable to franchisees that there's a lot of risk associated with that. And so they're like, okay, this could be a profitable market. However, if we look at the risk and then the associated legal costs that could come out of that, is it worth entering? Probably not. And so there's a lot of people a lot of brands that are very hesitant to enter Korea for that reason.
I think this is the right timing for you to talk about your background, because do you have that experience like of having gotten into this franchise model? Were you aware of all these risks when you got in? But because like before that, what were you even doing?
Yeah, so I actually started as a burger flipper in McDonald's when I was 15.
Interesting.
So I guess my experience with franchising started there, and I think McDonald's gave me a healthy appreciation for franchising. Fortunately, I had a supervisor she became like a good mentor, and she like really helped me kind of rise up through the ranks fairly quickly. And McDonald's actually, they paid for my undergrad because they saw me as kind of like a rising star.
That's awesome. Wow.
Because for me, as soon as I became got into management at McDonald's, I started to realize, okay, like this is a very interesting aspect of business, saying like, okay, hey, there's these levers that you can control when you're looking at your profit and loss statement. If you want to increase your revenue, maybe you have to invest a little bit here, and then there's different things you can pull to increase the bottom line profitability. And so for me as like a 17, 18-year-old kid, I became so fascinated with that, and I was like, okay, like this is pretty interesting. I want to do more. And even though it was my own money, I was like, I just love being able to increase that bottom line. And
so you did work all the way up from the bottom to the management.
Yeah. So I started, working, 15-year-old, like in the back, flipping burgers. Very quickly, it was like, okay, let me get cross-trained across all the different roles in the restaurant. And then luck have you, or I guess maybe not so on the management side, is obviously the US kind of has a drug problem, but the manager one of the nights got high and then couldn't come into work. And so he pretty much came to the door and he was just like, hey, Joe, here's the keys to the restaurant. I need you to like run my shift and close up for the night.
Wow. Okay.
And so what ended up happening is I just took on managing the shift for that night, and the performance was phenomenal compared to his performance. And so the supervisor came the next day and she was just like, hey, Sonny was his name. It's not his real name, but
sure.
Sonny is his name. And it was like, okay, hey, Sonny, like, what's up with this performance? And he's like, well, actually, that wasn't me. I got too high and actually I'm quitting this job, but that was Joe. And he put me up there and she was just like, wow, this is phenomenal. Can you do more? So she tested me out for a couple of weeks, and I just kept having good performance. And so that's kind of what kicked me off of the management track. Started with the shift management, then it eventually became like the general manager of the whole restaurant. Then that turned into like 3 restaurants. Then I turned into like a little bit of like a turnaround specialist, where I'd go into an underperforming restaurant.
Man, that's so cool.
Make the changes.
I didn't even know there were positions like that within McDonald's.
I mean, it's that's the kind of crazy thing too, is you can see, you don't think about it when you think about McDonald's, or you think, okay, burger flipper, the fry guy, somebody at the check-in counter. But the reality is like, there's a lot of complexity behind it, and there is massive career progression that you can go.
But what do you think it was about what you did that just skyrocketed productivity? Like, is it your leadership? What is it?
I think it's more, I would say a little bit of the leadership aspect, and just having a healthy understanding of like doing the right thing.
Right.
Because like what ends up happening in these franchise systems is there is an operating manual, and the instructions on how to be the best are already there. Because like
best practices, basically.
The best practices. Yeah. And then the problem is, a lot of managers, a lot of even franchisees themselves, they get it, and then it just kind of stops there after they read it. They never kind of execute on those, or they're not diligent about following up. And so what I mean is, I say, okay, hey, you're making fries at McDonald's, and you should be able to, make your fries in this certain type of way and package them in this certain type of way, and it should be this fast.
Yeah.
I train you the one time and I leave and I never come back and check on you. And then like 3 months later, like you're still doing it, but you're not increasing your efficiency. You're doing it wrong. You're overstuffing the fries. Like, and that throws your yields out, like decreases profitability.
Wow.
And then stuff like, various, things become a little bit of a math equation. Like if you want to increase your revenue in the US, 75% of your business is through the drive-through. Okay. So typical.
interesting. Yeah,
typical. This is pre-digital ordering, so like pre-Uber Eats, and so 75% is coming through the drive-through. And so if you're only doing like 10 cars through the drive-through because it's taking you, say 6 minutes per car, and then you're only getting those through, then it limits your revenue potential.
Yeah.
But if you can work on increasing your efficiency, then you can get 20 cars through the drive-through in 1 hour. There you go. They're increasing your revenue.
It's a very much of a like a management consultant mindset, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, because you're just breaking everything down to the different components and variables, and then trying to increase efficiency to maximize the output or optimize certain processes.
And so, and McDonald's, I think, does a really good of like, they break it down and they structure it so you can actually like, you can learn it. But I think where the disconnect is like learning it versus putting it into practice. And then not only do you put it into practice, but then you have to ensure that your subordinates put it into practice.
Right.
And so usually like there's, I guess, those 3 components. And then for people who do poorly, it's like either break here or break here, So either they stop, they never really put the best practices into place, or they try to put the best practices in place, but it doesn't go down to the subordinate as well. And so there's a lack of training or a lack of follow-up. And so generally that's what leads to underperformance.
So sounds to me like even at that stage, you're already like, you figured out this whole franchise model. Oh, if I could do my own one, I will make money.
Yeah. I remember I actually talked to the organization I worked for. They had like almost 132 McDonald's across the greater Texas region. And I remember going to the grandfather had started. So he had opened the first location. I think it was like in like 67. And he had, he was the guy that is like, okay, I'm opening the restaurant. I'm working in here day one. I'm really grinding and getting after it. And then he managed to kind of grow it to this, and it was now on the 3rd generation. So his son took it over, and then his grandson ended up taking over at that point. And so I was working underneath his son and then his grandson by the end of it. But I remember going to the grandfather at the one point and being like, hey, I really want to open McDonald's. I think I see the potential in myself. And he was actually pretty supportive of it. He was like, hey, okay, slow down. He's like, I know that you're good at operating the restaurant, but there's actually a lot more that you haven't thought about that goes into this. And so he actually took the time to also then say, I understand that you're young and ambitious, but also like, let's open your mind a little bit. And so then he starts going into, first you have to start looking at financing options, like how are you going to fund this? Because you only make, at that point in time, it was like, $65,000 a year. Like you probably don't have that much in savings. Like you're going to go to the bank and they're going to laugh at you. So like you have to figure out how you're going to fund this thing. The average McDonald's restaurant costs $2.5 million to kind of get from, ground to a freestanding restaurant. And so you have to think, okay, where are you going to get that money from? And then 2, is a bank going to trust you because you're only, 19, 20 years old? Probably not. And so you have to think about all these factors that are going to influence that. And then, you have to also think, okay, now who's going to be project managing that restaurant build? Do you have experience doing the actual build itself and getting the permits that are required, getting in this commercial equipment, doing these things? And I was just like,
sounds
so my mind was like,
yeah.
I was like, oh, actually, I know nothing, but it was a pretty good eye opener to say, okay, hey, while I'm in the business working on it, it may seem easy to be able to just do it, but it's not as easy as it may seem. And so it was kind of a eye opener for me to be like, okay, yes, I'm young and ambitious, but maybe let me hold back a little bit and try to look into this more.
You're talking about, so like being a franchisee is also that challenging.
I mean,
but being a franchisor is also super challenging as well, I would imagine.
So I would say for being in our position as master franchisee for F45 Korea, we act as the franchisor on the ground.
Yeah.
And that's also, it has its own challenges.
Yeah.
Because we also operate our own locations here, but we also franchise out to franchisees.
Right.
And I would say the biggest issue there is then it becomes a little bit of a relationship business. And what I mean by that is, it's extremely tough to get a franchise loan in Korea. US, it's pretty easy. Korea, it's not. And so if it costs Sao like 400 million Korean won to open up a location here, generally that's coming from people's savings. And generally it's their life savings. It's like they've saved up to this point. Maybe they're getting some money from their parents or some friends and family. But that's a lot of money to put up front and invest. And we can't guarantee their performance. As much as we want them to succeed, the reality is we know through statistics and just like the way the franchise model works is you're going to have people who underperform, you're going to have people overperform, you're going to have middle of the pack. And our job is to kind of make sure as much as possible that we don't have closures and that we're moving that middle of the pack forward every single year, because we want the averages to be increasing. And so we try to go through like a good screening process, and you can pull different levers through that screening process to kind of say, okay, can I control for this? But it's nearly impossible. There hasn't been a franchise system in the world that I believe that, I haven't seen any case studies or anything that has been like 100% of our franchisees that come in the door are successful. And they do really great job. Like, if you can name a company, I would love to read about it.
I think I remember a recent lawsuit by like a famous Korean chef, right? The Baek Jong-won. And because he's got like crazy number of like shops that he franchises out to. And then I think there was like a band of franchisees were like protesting, right? It's just like, oh, you didn't guarantee results. Like, nobody can guarantee results. But then people have this like a sense of entitlement. Well, no, you said that if we lose this money, you might even like compensate us for that type of loss or something like that. And so like, but then the question does become like how, when everybody's sort of given the equal amount of support, so you're providing equal opportunity to all these franchisees, but what is sort of the determinant factor that makes some of them overperform? They're like superstars, they make so much money, and then is it just like pure luck, or is it like they're just lazy? What is there some sort of like a formula?
I would say for. I remember that interview, and he actually described it as like a diamond. We always look at it as kind of like a histogram chart, but he described it as a diamond. You have the top level performers, you have the middle of the pack, the underperformers. And then, the responsibility of the franchisor is to kind of say, okay, these underperformers, like what's causing, can I move them up or can I move them out? Because maybe this is not the right opportunity for them. Like,
how do you move someone out?
And so usually moving them out means like, hey, can we sell your location to another franchisee or somebody else we find that may care about the business a little bit more. And then in terms of like what we've seen in our business, because it is a very high touch business, like you have to, it's people and fitness. Generally it's very tough to get a good portion of business and get people motivated to come into the gym frequently and consistently. And so the only way to kind of do that is to be a little bit high touch and, be motivating, be consistent with them and communicate and become a little bit of a friend to them, or, at least an authority figure on fitness so that they can feel confident to, come in, or they build that community that comes in. And with it being kind of a high touch business, I find that people who perform very well versus those that don't, it purely is down a little bit to the leadership. And so generally what I mean by that is, somebody coming into the brand and saying, okay, hey, I have these traits, I have this desire, I have this passion for the brand, and I'm able to disseminate that to my staff. Because what we see in our industry is like the people who are really good with that, they perform like stellar. They have low employee turnover, which then leads to low member turnover. Whereas like vice versa is sometimes we get, say, I'm using this as an example, we have some guy that's coming from a corporate job from a Chable family or a Chable company. They've been in management for 20 plus years. And so they kind of meet the criteria of like, you've led teams and done these things, but then their approach is generally like very directive, very checked out. Like, why do I have to come in? Like, I have this manager employed. Like, you should hit the number. Like, that's it. Like, and then of course it creates fiction amongst the team, and then the team becomes demotivated. And then because they're demotivated, that energy affects the members. The members don't feel high energy, and then they're like, well, this isn't as premium of an experience as I thought, or I'm not getting that energy. So like, let me go find somewhere else that has that energy that I need. And so therefore their revenue is affected. And so they end up being underperform. And what ends up happening is, with these people, because they've been so successful in their career to date, they also have this tendency to not be as open-minded. And so whenever you try to give them, because we give performance coaching and we're like, hey, you know, here's what this studio is doing. Like, here's what we're seeing at your location. You know, we need to try to replicate some of this, maybe try this. And then what ends up happening is you see that they're very close-minded and they don't really react very favorably to that kind of feedback. And then the business just continues on going how it is. And so our objective is to say, hey, you know, in the nicest way possible, maybe this opportunity isn't the right opportunity for you. Like, you know, you have been successful in other things and we appreciate that, but this is just not where we expected it or you expected it to be. So like, let's see if we can exit you out of the business. And that's also one way where you can say, hey, you know, high performing franchisee over here, maybe you can absorb this location and you can also grow your business. And then it protects us and then it moves the averages upwards.
Right. So you have all this like McDonald's experience, but did you realize that at some point in the future, you'll end up in Korea doing this whole like franchise model? How did you go about becoming a master franchisee for F45?
Yeah, I think it was always in the back of my head. Like whenever I left McDonald's, I didn't think I would actually go back into franchising. I left McDonald's, went into the military, and then post business school, I went to Samsung, which brought me to Korea. It just so happens at Samsung, given my McDonald's experience, they had this project on franchising. They're like, hey, like, let's put you on this project of franchising. So we started looking at their Samsung experience stores. It's like their retail stores. Here, they in Korea, they directly manage everything, but overseas, they do through a franchise model.
Interesting.
And the issue was, you know, they were not performing well in most markets.
Right.
And so, there was like a massive project to kind of rationalize that, to say, okay, how do we kind of turn this around a little bit? So I started working on that, and it kind of reinvigorated, like, okay, if I'm taking this location and that, like, how do I replicate the best practice behavior here and then like deploy that out into these other locations? I was like, okay, like, you know, but I'm constrained in this corporate Samsung environment. And then even the recommendations that I had and like some of these things that I felt like very clearly would make a significant difference, particularly to the, you know, bottom profitability line, it was met with a lot of bureaucracy. So I was like, okay, like maybe corporate life is, you know, a little bit too constraining for me, especially in a corporation like Samsung. And so I was like, okay, like entrepreneurship, you know, what can I do? And then that goes back to, you know, me finding F45 in New York City and then kind of seeing, hey, there's this gap here. And then fortunately, my wife, Jamie, also, she has like, she's also thinks that way a lot. She's like, hey, you know, when she was in New York City, she actually, for undergrad, she actually created like this website that was catered towards Koreans in New York City that would create these like kind of coupon promotion deals, or she'd get kind of a cut of the promotion if they purchased through the site. And so she always kind of had this, you know, I want to do something my own, and then be able to make the decisions myself and either succeed or fail myself. And so fortunately we got together and started talking about it. And then we talked about F45, started looking into it. And the first location was actually opening pretty soon. It was brought by a couple from Australia, David and MJ Yo. they opened up their first location in Korea in Gangnam, or like nearby the COEX. And we went in, tried the workout, finally convinced Jamie to come try it, because she had historically been like Pilates yoga type. Brought her in to try, and she just like fell in love with the community, and she was like, okay, like let's really consider this. And so we just signed as just a franchisee directly with the headquarters. And we opened our location in Gwanghwamun. And it just like day one, the numbers were like crazy.
By the way, is it really that easy to become a master franchisee? Like you just contact the headquarters in the US just like that, or
it's a little bit different. So generally, it's that easy to become a franchisee. Generally, what they'll do is they'll say, "Hey, we have this criteria, like this liquidity requirement. You have to be worth this amount. Like your net worth has to be some criteria. You have to have business management experience. There is a list of criteria they judge you by."
And this is not just F45. This could apply to
apply to any typical franchise concept. Some franchise brands are like a little bit more strict. Some franchise brands are a little bit more open. Generally, the ones that are a little bit more strict are the more successful brands, whereas the ones that are a little bit more open are like sometimes they scale too fast and they end up crashing and burning because they also get all these like unqualified individuals, and it hurts the brand. So you have to do a balancing act.
The reason why I'm asking about this is that now I see so many American brands here, like, from I don't know, Shake Shack to fast, like a Five Guys,
Jimmy John's.
And what's going on? Are they like, they're all like kind of are they master franchisees?
Yeah, master franchises.
So who's doing all this? And then can anybody, because there's so many brands to bring to Korea, not to mention all the other Asian countries, right?
Yeah. So I think in a master franchising case, it's a little bit more work behind it. Essentially, you have to pay some upfront fee, and then you have to problem some development deal. So what you'll say is, hey, I'm going to give you this fee to get the exclusive rights to, like for us, we got the exclusive rights to all of Korea. And then we have to promise them, negotiate with them and say, hey, here's what we believe is kind of the capacity, the amount we can support, Korea can support of F45 and the units of F45 within Korea. And then you have to, the first number they throw out is probably going to be very aggressive. The first number you're going to throw out is going to be very conservative. And so you have to meet in the middle somewhere. And so it took us, we opened up Gwanghwamun and immediately started negotiating for the master franchise. And it took us about 1.5 years.
I see.
To finally sign the deal. Because of that process. And then as part of that, they also go through, your typical background checks of like, let's order a criminal background history on you. Let's do credit history on you. Let's have a third party, like, capital firm, like vet your capital capacity to be able to say, can you actually deliver? Do you have the funds required? Do you have the experience required to like deliver on this commitment? And so generally, if you're signing a deal, you'll go through that. And so what you'll see, particularly in Korea, is like, I feel like in Korea, it's very heavily weighted towards like the top 1%, and so you'll have these chaebol families or these firms or their family offices that then purchase these master franchise groups or master franchise rights. So SBC is one to get a good example because they have multiple master franchise rights across several different F&B brands.
Right. So the threshold of like entry is very high.
Yeah, especially in QSR. If you look at QSR, to build out
QSR?
Quick service restaurants, F&B. So like restaurant business, it's CapEx intensive. So you have to have a lot of capital to spend to build out the location.
Yeah.
If it costs you like, say $2 million, or even like $1 million plus to build out a location, like you need to have a lot of capital to deploy.
Plus it's not guaranteed.
And it's not guaranteed. So you have to be able to assume the risk.
Right.
And so,
is that part of the reason why you didn't get into the F&B business?
Yeah, absolutely the reason why I didn't get into. I still think F&B is very attractive. Like it's a very attractive proposition, mainly because it's so scalable. like the margins are a little bit smaller, but because it's scalable, then you get, you can increase your margin spread a little bit as you scale up. But because then you get that scale, even if it's low margin, the profitability from it is pretty massive.
How did your military experience, as well as working in Samsung or going to business school, how did that sort of like take your franchising skills to the next level?
I would say more around, I would guess, stress management, like reaction to stress and ability to kind of handle high pressure situations.
So it is a stressful job.
It is, yeah. It is. It may seem very easy, but in the background, it can be very, very
I think that's
stressful.
the common misconception people have.
I think, yeah. And what you'll see too, and I mean, you can probably ask any franchise brand of how many people invest into the business thinking, oh, it's just, a franchise business is just you put the money in and then you start getting this money and it's just as simple as that. The reality is you're just buying a proven business model. So it's been proven that people are successful with it, but also there's a percentage of people that fail. And you're buying the business model and the operating manual playbook. Now you have to execute. And then people think there's this misconception that, oh, I don't really have to execute. I can hire employees. Yes, that's true, but then you have to manage those employees, and people really miss out on that, and like how much work goes into managing people and like developing people and ensuring they stay motivated and ensuring they keep learning. It's a pretty active job, and people kind of miss that element. Right. And so
I'd imagine that's sort of like the majority of the skill you learned it from the military.
Yeah, I would say like, in the military, my career was in special forces, so become a Green Beret. And kind of the one thing they kind of teach you is what's called the 5 soft truths. And so like special operations forces truth. And so first one is like people are more important than hardware. So, think about it. We're individuals, but then we get equipped with some of the most expensive military gear that's out there. You can get a gun that costs, some weapon system that's going to cost like $16 million. That can shoot up in the air and track a tank and then, take out a tank. But the reality is like, you still need a human to operate it.
Of course, yeah.
And so, that's the first soft truth is like humans are more important than hardware. Second one is quality over quantity. A few highly trained individuals, because we operate in 12-man teams. And so the way they work is like we can take 12 highly trained operatives and they're going to be more effective than 200 poorly trained individuals.
Yeah, it's like a whole 10x engineer concept, right? And so, one of the superstars better than like 10.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the next one would be, soft cannot be mass produced. So it takes time. You can't just be like, okay, you have to put the investment in the individual. And so they say like there's estimates depending on what source you reference. Our training pipeline in the qualification course is 2 years. And so it takes 2 years, and they estimate that training is roughly about $2 million. And then the training post that is roughly about $1 million per year in military budget that gets put towards training us and keeping us, continuously training. And so they put a lot of investment into this situation. The fourth one is, we can't be just rapidly produced after emergencies, because a lot of times what ends up happening is there's some kind of conflict, there's some kind of emergency, and then you want this like specialized force to go in, but you don't want to pay for it to be sitting there. So you want to kind of like defund it, or like say if you have in a business, if you're saying, oh, hey, I'm developing this mid-level management, I don't have a use for them now, but I know I want to grow, or maybe there is this kind of crisis that's going to happen in the future. They're not being productive right now, but I should invest in them and keep them growing because I know in the future something is going to happen and I'm going to need them, versus, all of a sudden I'm opening a new location, or all of a sudden my location's underperforming. Now I need to find somebody really quickly. Right.
But you also need resources to be able to do that too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Because you can.
Yeah. So balancing act.
Right.
And then the fifth one, Now I got to remember it. It'll come to me.
To me, it sounds very transferable to the business world, to the real life. Even doing things that are non-scalable at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say like the other element to it too is, in the military environment, I think it's also one of those situations where it also teaches you how to handle individuals. Because in the U.S. military, at least, people volunteer to come in, but you have people from all walks of life.
Yeah.
And it's not like, if you're put into a team, you're put responsible for a team. It's not like you can trade somebody out. It's not like you can fire them. So you're forced to handle those individuals, and you're forced to say, okay, us as a team, we're only as strong as our weakest link. And it's not like I can get rid of this person or fire this person. So how do I strengthen this? And so it teaches you a little bit of patience, but also teaches a little bit of humility, because even when I was first in the military, I thought it was so smart. I thought it was like so amazing. I thought I could be an individual performer and just like do all this stuff. But the reality is, you go on in this mission, and even through no fault of your own, you're supposed to be the leader. But this one individual is falling behind, and because something happened, it's mission failure. Now you all are responsible for the failure. Even though you performed to your highest level, it doesn't matter, because this guy, you didn't make sure to take care of him and make sure that he succeeded as well. And so it kind of teaches you that, element of kind of understanding like, hey, we're only as strong as the weakest link, but then also you need to have a little bit of humility and like kind of introspection to say, yes, you are a performer, but this is a team activity, this is a team mission, and we have to come together as a team.
Yeah.
And so I'd say there's that element. And then the other element would be, which I think helped propel me, is like, it makes me a little bit more open to different cultures, is like being deployed overseas. I've been deployed here in Korea, been to Afghanistan, different countries, different cultures, and then just being able to interact with people, which I grew in a small town, Texas, predominantly white, next city over, predominantly African American, and so that was kind of my exposure growing up. I didn't really have a lot of exposure to Asians, didn't have a lot of exposure to people from the Middle East, Africa, and so you get exposure to these cultures and like the way their society operates, and so it kind of opens up your mind a little bit.
Since you did mention how much money the U.S. government invested in you to become this like a $3 million man, what is the training like to become the special and your Green Beret is like, again, you just throw that term around so casually, but that's as far as I'm concerned, that's like, isn't it one of the elitist like special forces? You do just like crazy missions and things like that, right?
Yeah, so it's generally considered some of the most elite units in the U.S. military. So you have U.S. Army Green Berets, or Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, MARSOC, and then you have Air Force PJs.
And not anybody can become this, even if they get trained, right?
Right. So generally what ends up happening is, for Green Berets specifically, so I came in under a 18 X-ray contract, which is essentially the military recruitment numbers are down. So the U.S. Army decided to, let's do this like cool guy advertisement campaign. Like, let's show this awesome video of like kicking down doors, like jumping out of helicopters, scuba diving, and rolling up in, guns on a boat. And then, hey, become special forces. You can sign this 18 X-ray contract. Well, and the kind of fine print of that contract was, if you fail training, you go to the needs of the military. Like, so we can essentially sign you wherever we want to.
Right.
Because, again, the military had an issue where their recruitment numbers were down. So there's a lot of unfilled positions that needed to get filled. And it's been very successful for recruitment efforts. However, like, generally 18 X-rays, like less than 10% of the people that sign this contract actually make it through the 2 years of training. And then the other route is you have to spend, I think it's 2 years minimum in the regular Army, and then you drop an application packet. So those people that go kind of through that process, which is the more standard process, have a higher pass rate, because generally they're vetted and kind of go through things. And
So how extreme are some of those trainings? Like, I mean, for me, probably I can't even imagine the extent that you would have to go through certain training. But
yeah, so it can be pretty extreme. There's like a few different documentaries out there that cover it. I think the one that's kind of most widely viewed as like 2 Weeks in Hell is the initial selection criteria. So if I were to say, give you an overview of the 2-year training pipeline. So 2-year training pipeline for us is called the qualification course. And so what ends up happening is whenever you're starting the qualification course, there's a selection, which is what the 2 Weeks in Hell documentary is based off of. So my 19X or 18 X-ray class started with 298, and we go to this selection class, and essentially you're with I forget the total number, but we cut down to 86 after that 2 weeks.
Wow.
And so it ends up being like closer to 3 weeks, but essentially all they're doing is testing like your physical ability. So they sit there and they put you in tents. You have to do like a typical like physical fitness test of like push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run, be able to do a certain amount of pull-ups. And that's the first couple of days. But then what they do is they kind of sleep deprive you a little bit. And so they'll let you sleep like 3-4 hours a night, wake you up, and then you have to go do some random mission scenario. And then they'll make you run, carrying your rucksacks with like 60 pounds on your back. You're kind of running and doing these things. And they kind of put you through this to kind of test your physical fitness ability, but then like your mental resilience, because it becomes a little bit more of a mental endurance game more so than a physical game.
Do you think it's something that some people are just born or wired differently, or is that something that that mental resilience is something that everybody can be trained on to a certain extent?
I think yes and no. I would say generally what ends up happening is, what at least I've seen in my class was the people who are a little bit more endurance-based athletes versus like your super intense gym bro. Actually, like the super intense gym bro was like one of the first guys to quit. Whereas the endurance, like kind of like myself, I was super skinny. I was a marathon runner going in at like 145 pounds. And so people always thought I was going to quit. And so I was
you're only 145?
Yeah, 145 pounds. So very, very skinny.
Okay, I see.
And so, it's like, it's one of those things but I would say it's also an element of, yes, I think it can be trainable, but also there's some people that are predisposed to not even push themselves to that level to say, hey, I'm willing to suffer this pain and learn to accept it, versus some people are just like, nope, too much for me, I'm done, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Sure,
it's just, that's, they chose to do that.
Yeah.
And then the amount of pain they put through you, like they also tell you have to be a little bit crazy to do this, because like who in their right mind is just going to put themselves through this pain just to get this. And so there is that element. And so I'd say like, that's kind of like the 3 weeks in hell, where they just kind of run you through different like physical scenarios. And the whole intent is just like really try to push you to your mental breakdown. Like you'll be in so much pain, you'll be crying, you're in pain, but you're having to do a team event. And so what they'll do is they'll also introduce this evaluation where you have to give 2 pink slips and 2 blue slips. And so you have to evaluate, say you're in a 12-person team and you say, okay, the 2 blue slips are the people who you think really contributed the most, and the 2 pink slips are the ones that you think they didn't contribute, they lagged behind, they're kind of hanging back and kind of letting everybody else do the work. And so there is kind of like a team element of like, you have to make sure you perform. So, politically that you're kind of doing what you need to do, to get through that process. And then the rest of it is just like, let's put you in pain to try to make you quit, to the point where your body's almost failing.
Yeah.
But we won't make it quite that intense and far, but we'll push you to that limit.
I mean, it sounds like some people could even die like during that process.
I think there has been in the past, but it's very, very uncommon.
I see.
Like very rare, very rare. Because usually you're pulled out before that. There has been like, you get automatically disqualified if you get injured. You get pulled out in certain situations, like you get dehydrated or you start to get delirious. Like so you have to have like some element of like, again, physical preparedness, that a mental ability to kind of hang on. If not, you're going to get pulled out. But generally, most of the time, it's just people go ring the bell and they quit.
Wow. So you pass all that, and then you become the Green Beret.
And so that passes you to that selection. So once you pass through that, you get selected, and then you start the qualification course. So that's the start.
Yeah, that's and then you go through the entire 2-year qualification training.
Yeah, exactly. And so from there, it goes into, it's a little bit, I would say that was probably the most physically demanding. After that, it's leadership courses, it's language culture training. So language culture for me was Korean. So I got exposure to like the Korean culture, Korean language. You go through that, and then they kind of say, hey, you're adults. We're going to put you in Korean language and culture school for 6 months. And this is what you're going to do from like 9 to 5 every day. But randomly on these random days, we're going to pull you out and you're going to make you do like a 12-mile run. We're going to make you do a 26-mile ruck march. We're going to put these random tests out there. You don't know when it's coming, but you better keep yourself in shape. Because they kind of test your ability to like, can you be responsible? Can you keep yourself motivated and going for these things? Because at any point in time you can be called out to go do these things.
Wow. At that point, like, what's your mindset like? Do you just like are you in this like a killer mode where like I'm just ready to kill people type of thing?
No, I don't think it's that. I think it's more like your mindset is more like it's eager because you want to get the Green Beret, because like even though we're called the Green Berets, but we wear a Green Beret.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's a thing that you covet because you want to get that Green Beret. You want to get the Special Forces tab. And so that's kind of in that mindset. Or at that point in time, that's what you're thinking. You're like, okay, I got to do what I can do to keep myself as prepared as possible. And then of course, like you're trying to talk to people to try to figure out whatever tips and tricks and what can you do to make yourself more and more prepared, because you know that the training's tough. And so I think that's kind of the general mindset of individuals there.
And once you become the Green Beret, then like, do you have to go on like these crazy missions or? Yeah.
So once you become a Green Beret, it depends kind of on your theater of operations. So I was assigned Korean, and generally you go to a group based off of your language. And so mine is kind of Asia theater of operations. So I got assigned to first group. First group is in JBLM, Fort Lewis, Washington, or Okinawa. There's a detachment there.
Right.
And then you have, like 7th group, which covers South America, 5th group, 10th group, multiple groups throughout the regions that focus on different geographic areas. And then the way the mission sets are broken down is we had the war on terrorism. So you had OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom, going on. So every group was rotating through Afghanistan or Iraq. So I did a couple of deployments in Afghanistan. And then outside of those, then you do what's called different things, but you'll do like essentially FID missions. So FID is Foreign Internal Defense. And so what you'll do is you'll do a deployment, or you'll go to a host nation and you'll work with their internal agencies to be able to increase their resources or increase their ability to handle certain things like counter terrorism, counterinsurgency, like counter human trafficking.
This is like serious stuff we're talking about.
Pretty serious.
Right.
Like counter drug trafficking, these kind of things that just help elevate U.S. allies' abilities. So.
Wow. I know we're getting a bit sidetracked, but are there any like extreme? Because I'm really fascinated by, we talked about mental resilience, and I'm sure this applies to all the stress that you'll later on be getting when it comes to running a business as well. But when you're dealing with this like life or death situations, can you talk about some of the like extreme situations that you've been in, and at the time, like what's your mindset's like?
Yeah, so I think part of the training process, you're going through this 2 years of training, and then the continuous training you do after is like they always tell you, because I'm coming in as a young, at the time I was 22 years old when I became a Green Beret, and by far the youngest guy on the team. So I have all these more senior guys that, been through, Afghanistan, Iraq, different deployments, been through these different wartime scenarios. And what they kind of say is like, the common saying is like, you never really rise to the occasion like you think. You actually fall to the level of your training. Because like, you kind of plan out this mission. The reality is like nothing ever goes 100% to plan. And then you're going to get this, spike of like whatever ends up happening, and you're going to get this adrenaline. And the reality is like, you kind of do get this adrenaline, which creates like a super focus.
Oh, yeah.
But the reality is like, because you become super focused, it's not like Hollywood shows where it's just like, let me karate chop like 12 guys at one time and doing these things. Actually, your mind starts running through, okay, I was trained to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. And so you start falling to that level of training where it's like, okay, this is exactly what we're trained to do. We have to like put this into place. We have to move these people here, position these people here, and then we have to start preparing for this.
You go on autopilot pretty much.
And so you really kind of fall to those levels, and you start to say, okay, hey, do we have an injury here, or do I have to prepare medevac, and start doing these things. You start preparing these kind of systems that you've been trained on. And so
you've been fired at and like just been on the like life-threatening situations.
Yeah. So, in Afghanistan, it's, pretty common. The area where it's like, we're in the Ghazni province, it was very, very active. So we were probably, I would say every 3 days we were there, probably in a firefight situation. So firefight just means we're shooting at one another, trying to either escape the situation or, take them out. And so in those situations, again, it's, you kind of get this spike of adrenaline.
Yeah.
You start to fall to those systems, people become very directed. But then it also, I'd say, gives you a healthy appreciation too for understanding that, there's injuries and casualties, but you can't also let that distract you. So like, for instance, there is some emergency, there's some fire that needs to be put out, but then you have to go through your list of priorities. So you have to say, hey, is like, for instance, if I'm on a mission and, two of my colleagues go down, they're wounded.
Yeah.
But I'm still in the direct line of fire.
Right.
You're trained to remove yourself from the direct line of fire and then figure out how to save them, because, there might be a situation where, they've already passed away, or you don't know what their situation is. And so it's better to kind of be able to save yourself so that you can then save them if they are.
Man, that's
versus let me immediately try to like pull them out of the line.
Because you might get shot then, right?
Because you might get shot. And so it's being able to say, okay, even though it's high stress, high pressure, that these people need to get taken care of, you still have to remove that emotion a little bit and prioritize what's important to be able to then act on that situation.
Does that change you as a person, being able to think like that? And then I'm not even talking about PTSD or anything like that, but like, because when you're in that kind of situations, like, how do you change as a person?
I think absolutely. I would say my first time that I was ever in a firefight, I was kind of in this like shock.
Yeah.
I was just, you always you see Hollywood, you always think, oh, like I'm going to be brave, heroic, and then all these things.
And you are sufficiently trained at that point.
You are trained. And so you go there and you feel like, okay, I'm ready to kind of get at this. I'm ready to like, save the world and fight terrorism. And you kind of come super motivated, and then the reality hits. And then you're like, oh shit, this is scary. You know, you're like, oh wow, like
Even
this is
to
real.
somebody who's been training for years.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you kind of get desensitized to it over time. So like if it happens enough, then you're like, okay, it's not as scary as it was the first time. It's not as serious, and your reaction becomes different.
Yeah.
But it's a wake up call. You know, it's like, okay, hey.
The very first time, like, why are they shooting him?
Yeah. And then, you know, if you start to hear like, you know, the bullets whizzing by, or you start to see the dust kicked up and these things, and you're like, oh, okay, this is real. Like, let me think about how to respond to this. And then I think from that moment is whenever your mind kind of slowly adapts, when you're like, okay, hey, I got to change the way I think a little bit. And the way I think is probably a little bit different than, what people, I guess, like more civilian mindset would be, is that ranking of like, how do I prioritize what's important, even in like clearly stressful situations? Whereas, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily have to do that. Like, there are some professions that do, you know, like doctors that are, you know, evaluating casualties coming in. You know, a doctor has to say, oh, hey, I'm only one doctor, but then I have like 5 patients that I have to deal with. Like, what's the most critical patient? And then I act on the ranking of severity. And so you have some professionals that kind of have that mindset kind of drilled into them. And so some people, you know, it can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing, you know?
So basically when you came to Korea, like on a mission, like that's not because you came to Korea to start a franchise, but
no.
You're also serving like a mission in Korea as well.
So the first time I was in Korea was like 2013, and then again in 2014. It was
why were you here?
So Korea does this annual exercise. I believe it's still called Key Resolve or Full Eagle. But essentially it's all about increasing like Korea interagency operations to prepare for worst case scenario, or just to increase the capability of Korea as an allied force of the US. And so for us, it was working on, okay, hey, you know, how can we combat human trafficking? What steps can we take to then say, hey, let's put these things into place, and kind of run through these scenarios, and then how can we increase the agency's ability to address these issues?
Human trafficking issue in Korea.
Yeah. And so,
because most people are like, is that a thing?
I think most people believe like, so like first I think it's important to break down what human trafficking is. So human trafficking is kind of classified largely into 2 categories. So one is like forced labor, and the other is sex trafficking.
Right.
And so if you're looking at human trafficking overall, you know, it's estimated that, you know, some reports say up to 50 million people worldwide. So that's, you know, population of Korea is about 50 million. And so think about it like, that's how many people are involved in this human trafficking worldwide. But the reality is it doesn't get that much attention. It's one of those things that it's a negative element of society. So people kind of tend to like,
sweep it under the rug.
It's bad. And I whenever I hear about a major news article, I react to it, but in reality, it's actually happening in everyday life, but we just kind of sweep it under the rug. And so even in a very safe country like Korea, it happens, you know, it's not as prominent. Like you'll have, you know, like generally what happens is, you know, it's estimated that about 1/3 of the human trafficking actually happens in Southeast Asia. So it's really,
like
that's
Thailand,
Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam. So it's a really affected region. And so a lot of efforts are kind of put there. But the reality is it happens in every country in the world. You know, even the US has a big human trafficking problem.
Right. So it's your job to effectively identify what's going on, and then you just go bust them or something.
Yeah. So it's a little bit different in some ways. So essentially the way the US works is through that FID mission mindset. So foreign internal defense. So we don't directly combat it, but what we do is we combat it through supporting a host nation. So we come in and say, hey, Korea, you're our host nation. So we want to increase your capabilities.
Right.
And then we're there along the way to help push you forward to bettering the situation, whatever it may be. And so
One complaint that people might have about Korea is that because it's perceived to be so safe, that people actually complain about the lack of competency by the police, where they don't really seem to be doing anything. Even you get like caught for traffic violations or something, and people start arguing with the cops, and I feel like they get no respect. There's no sense of like, can you enforce anything? So maybe that's almost like a side effect of living in a society that's too safe. Can they even deal with any actual human trafficking situations?
Yeah, and I think that, I think I have a lot of respect for, certain functions and certain individuals in the Korean military, because there is a lot of, inspiring individuals and capable individuals. But I also think Korea does have a little bit of a issue with that, in terms of like, because it has been relatively safe, it's been relatively safeguarded society, like I guess the police force of Korea, the military force of Korea, doesn't get this level of exposure, and it doesn't even put itself in that position to get that exposure. So its capability will always not match up to the capability of these more advanced countries that do have this direct conflict. Yeah, it's kind of almost an effect of the society. I think the U.S. it kind of has an issue with crime, drugs, gun violence, but then also its police force, FBI, its agency or operations there is like it because the country kind of demands this level to be able to combat that. Right. That we're able to rise to that level. Whereas Korea, it's not even necessary.
No.
It's like it's so like such a low crime rate, or at least violent crime rate, that it's like, okay, we can train these individuals, but is it really even necessary to kind of put that effort there?
Right.
Because we'd have nothing to fight. We have nothing to do.
So to not go off on a complete tangent, but it's, I think, tangentially related, this lack of, I suppose, incompetency, but at the same time, this bureaucracy that exists in Korean society, where things, especially for foreigners, might not function the way it's supposed to, or if you, let's say, get in an unfavorable situations, or you get treated unfairly, even in the context of running a business, or you get like shorthanded or something like that, then nothing seems to get done to solve the problem. You can complain and go to, oh, this guy tried to just stab me in the back for my business, blah blah blah. They're like, yeah, just figure it out, right?
Yeah. I mean, I see that proliferate across, especially doing business here. It's so many times you just kind of hit a brick wall. Right. And you're like, okay, I can solve for this somehow. And then you try to bring the solution or some type of solution to the powers that be. And then you're just stopped. You really can't get anywhere.
Yeah. Is that something that, not you, because I feel like you're capable of solving any problem just based on the conversation we've just been having, where you just deal with so many life and death situations. You're like, it doesn't matter, I'm going to figure this out. But for a regular civilians who are interested in running a business in Korea, they want to become some sort of a franchisee, or just start a business in general. And they get all these like roadblocks with this like a bureaucracy and, like unfavorable treatment for foreigners. Like, how do you suggest that they combat this? Or like, is it just better not to pursue any business opportunities in Korea?
Yeah, I mean, I would say no. I think it's absolutely worth pursuing, because I think there's actually a lot of opportunities.
Really? Can you elaborate on that?
So
like, what kind of opportunities there?
What I mean by that is, whenever I look at the U.S., there's opportunities available in the U.S., but there's intense competition. And what I mean by that is, chances are that somebody has thought of the idea and is actively working on it. And the way the U.S. is able to support it is there's a lot of resourcing and structure that are set up to make businesses succeed, particularly small businesses. Because like small business is the backbone of America.
I thought that's the backbone of should be the backbone of every country. But.
And so I tend to feel that conglomerates are the backbone of Korea society, but that's my opinion. But whereas in Korea, it's like, actually, because the economy itself has advanced so rapidly over the past 50 years,
right?
It's actually advanced at such a rapid rate that it has a lot of gaps. And by gaps, I mean there's a lot of opportunities that if you're in more Western countries and you get those exposure to like, you know, a little bit more advanced or more progressive economy, you're like, oh, okay, like totally there is this solution to this problem here. And you come here and you see in Korea, okay, there's this problem, but there's still not a solution yet. Just because it hasn't got there yet, because you know either the economy just kind of outpaced it, or just, you know, again, I also tend to feel that there's this big information silo. Like Korea is like very information siloed, and so because it hasn't penetrated that information silo, that it hasn't, you know, this opportunity, this gap hasn't been addressed. And I think that's why we were able to succeed so well with F45. Is to be honest, there's no reason why boutique fitness was not a big thing in Korea yet. You know, you have thousands of gyms across the country, but you know, this very, very popularized concept that has, you know, hundreds of brands in the US. There's no real true person or company that's been able to address this gap in the market.
Right.
And so you can see that and you're like, oh, okay, like a little bit of a light bulb moment, and you're like, oh,
I think what you're
this.
saying right now is just so key. But the thing is, if you're, let's say, Korean just living here, and they don't have that kind of perspective, I hear this every day. Oh, there's no more, like, there's nothing to do. There's no more opportunities. It's like, there's like a zero-sum game where everybody's competing against like, oh, okay, I need to open a coffee shop, blah, blah, blah. But then they go out of business in like 3 to 6 months, guaranteed, right? Yeah. No matter what they do. And further, I think, like, all the foreigners look at Korea as like, what can I do? So I think what you're describing, I totally agree with you that there are just so many opportunities. But from your perspective, maybe could you provide some more anecdotal examples of what some of those opportunities could be, that people listening, they're like, oh, maybe I should do that in Korea. Yeah. Unless you want to do that yourself.
No, it's okay. I got a lot on my plate already.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, for instance, like I know the franchising space very well, so a lot of these references will be around franchising.
Sure.
You know, in the US, there's capital firms, there's, you know, fintech companies that support franchisee funding. So there's no such system in Korea. So if I were to say, hey, I'm a very successful operator of, you know, 2 McDonald's locations, and I want to get funds to be able to open up the next one, I can go to the bank, which would be pretty typical here. But the banks in Korea, they want to say, okay, do you have property? Do you have land? If you don't, it's too risky. You know, and generally that's generally the conversation with Korean banks. Whereas the US is like, hey, what's your profit and loss statement? What's your cash flow look like? And then, okay, I'll lend you based off of my assumption of the risk associated with this cash flow and your ability to service that debt. And now there's very successful fintech companies and like capital groups that are all tech-based that essentially replace the banks.
Yeah.
Or what they do is they act as a platform. So they say, hey, you can all come to my platform and I'll find the best bank for you to work through to get the best deal, the best interest rate. And then I'll provide, like, essentially the bank will then pay me a fee for sourcing your loan.
So basically financing companies that could specialize in this type of field.
Yeah, and so there's 2 things there. It's like you could be this platform company, which I find that Korea, generally like Korean tech tends to favor platform companies, and they do a really good job at platform companies. And so a platform company that then says, okay, hey, I'm this fintech solution that I can take your specific loan application and I can shop it out to these different banks. And then whoever gives me the best deal, then I get the sourcing fee, and that's my one stream of revenue. But you don't really have a solution like that in Korea. And so it's like one thing that there's clear use case. It's available in the US, it's available in UK, it's available in Australia. Australia has half the population of Korea.
Right.
Why is it not in? Why is it?
You just totally preempted my next question. Is that because in Korea there's enough population? But again, Australia is half the population of South Korea, and they have it, and it seems to be doing well. So
Exactly. Yeah, and so it's like, it's one of those things. Is like, why is this solution not available? And it should be. And the reality is, there's plenty of franchise businesses in Korea. Like, there is an addressable market, and there is a large enough addressable market that you can make a great return from that business.
Right.
And so, I think one other issue that I find with Korea is a little bit of a mindset. Because you mentioned it a little bit earlier. I have to open up a chicken shop. I have to open up a coffee shop. I find that people tend to go with what they see, and then they just want to do that same exact thing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you open your mind a little bit more, that's where you find the opportunities. And then one other issue with that mindset of saying, let me just replicate, is then you oversaturate.
Yeah.
So one thing that I find very frustrating in Korea is that we have like probably 10 to 15 different copycat concepts, who are, I'll say, more politically benchmark concepts.
Right.
Just benchmark.
I know which one you're talking about.
And so what they do is they come in, and we've literally had them come into our locations, and they're like taking pictures of everything, filming it, like documenting it.
But they can never copy the actual, like, the DNA of it, right?
And the reality is, like, that's where they limit themselves. And so they can do it. Of course, you just want to copy some successful business model. I understand. However, like, just going in and copying the appearance of it, it doesn't give you that DNA. Like, what does a brand represent? And then it also doesn't give you the operational knowledge behind it.
Yeah.
And so the one thing I think what's so good about us as F45 versus our benchmark competition is, F45 has been around for 15 plus years now. And then the people employed in that have been in franchising for, decades. It's like, okay, hey, the brand itself has all this best practice knowledge, but then the people that are coming into this industry for, all of the US, Australia, UK, like, they come from different franchise brands, and they're able to make this more robust system.
Right.
Whereas random guy from Korea who just comes and walks into our thing saying, I'm going to create this business. And the reality is he's not making the DNA of it. He's just saying, I just have to copy paste this, and then, like, that's it.
Yeah.
And the reality is, business is so much more than that. And so he misses kind of like, I got to really put the passion, brand, DNA behind this, so then the consumers feel that. But then the expertise that goes into building that, he doesn't have generally, or she doesn't have. So, generally they're probably, 30, 40 years old maybe. And so they have some experience doing different things. But are you able to kind of employ a team at that level? Probably not. And so you kind of miss these operationalized practices that should be put into place to really make it successful and scale. And so I'm not saying they're not successful. It's just like,
I feel like there's a ceiling.
There's a ceiling. There's a ceiling, and like there's always going to be that kind of second tier status that they'll be in, and it's going to stop somewhere.
It's not even about that particular industry. I think it's just like same for everywhere, that people just try to copy you, the appearance of it, but the substance, the soul, the purpose or the brand, it's something that you just cannot replicate that easily.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it was like, I think I found it pretty wild whenever I first got to Korea in 2019. What became pretty popular was the, excellent, like, egg.
Oh, yeah.
T-egg. Like, so all of these egg sandwich franchises started popping up. And then, like, I forget which one was the first one. And
I've seen egg slut. Yeah. Which I was like, the name just sounds hilarious.
Yeah. But you start to see all these. And then what ends up happening is, next thing I know, and I'm walking down the block, and there's like 6 or 7 different brands, but all the same thing.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, now that just means that the whole market is crushed.
Yeah.
And so now you go, it's been not even 5 years now. And then, like, what brand is still around? Like, they virtually disappear. I'm sure there's still like some very successful locations that are operating, but the level, it's kind of one of those things where I guarantee it probably ramped up to like 300 or so locations across the different brands. And then now it's down to like 100, if I had to guess.
Yeah. So as a foreigner, how do you train and make sure that all these, like, your franchisees that are looking for they're looking up to you to share that best practices and operational excellence, Like, does that, the communication barrier, does that get in your way, or?
No, I think I was fortunate. And so I guess back to your earlier question, kind of went off on a side tangent there, but like if you're going to do a business here as a foreigner, you need to have Korean support,
right?
Whether it's a partner that's Korean or you have employees that are Korean, like it's like you're in Korea, like there's no getting around it.
Sure.
If you if you wanted to do everything yourself, but again, the ability to scale that beyond is going to be very, very limited. So you have to bring in this Korean talent. And that's where we have almost 90 employees now, and I'm one of 2 foreigners at our company. Everybody else is Korean. Although we brought Korean, Korean Americans, Koreans from the UK, Koreans from Thailand. And so we have a little bit of a diversity in the Korean population of our employees, which I find very valuable because I think you have to have a diversity of mindset, because I find that the education system here too is kind of structured a certain way. And so tend to have like a little bit of a group think, whereas we can bring in this outside perspective, it really helps a lot.
But still being able to manage 90 employees is I would argue it's as hard as I can't even imagine being able to properly manage 90 people, because that's a actual mid-sized company.
And so it can be tough.
Right.
I can say that. I mean, I think it just falls into, again, what systems are you putting into place? And like, if your intent is to scale, then you have to put the structure in place to be able to scale. And I think the hardest part for us at this point in the stage of our company is the mid-level management. So we're struggling to fill that gap, because we find that the fitness industry and like that level of employee is not non-existent almost, since you have to really develop it. And so we're struggling to get the right talent into place and get them trained the way that we want the business to run. You wouldn't necessarily have that issue in the US because there's so many companies that have this solid career progression.
I see.
So that you can start as a trainer, and then you can work your way through sales, you can work your way through marketing, you can work into finance, you can work to multi-unit operating, area supervisor, you can do a state supervisor, region supervisor. Whereas in Korea, I think the career progression in the fitness industry has been largely like, I'm a PT trainer, maybe I work for some chain gym, but then what's the next for me is there's really not much opportunity. So I just open up a PT shop.
Right.
And then I'm just the owner.
Right.
But if you're the owner of one PT shop, maybe you're not developing the managerial skills that we need. And so, there's a little bit of a talent gap that we see, and that's our biggest struggle at this point in time. I think over time, the country is going to, the industry itself in Korea is going to evolve, and it'll naturally, that gap will kind of be reduced in terms of, I guess, talent in the industry. And so I'm confident that it'll get there. It's just, again, it's a challenge for us to continue scaling.
I think you're right, because just because somebody's a great instructor, that really, like, people like this person, that's why they come to this thing and then they form a community. But doesn't mean that person's good at running a business or being able to manage his or her own team. And so, one person can be good at everything.
And that's the thing, is like, that's a common anecdote in the US, is actually the best trainers make the worst gym owners. Because the reality is, owning the gym versus being the trainer of the gym it's 2 completely different skill sets. And what ends up happening is you have this overly confident trainer who has had this success, but then you have to switch into, look, if you want this business to be successful, you have to train somebody else to do it, because one person can't do everything. So it's not like you're going to open up your gym and then you have to train every single client. No, you need to make those 6 individuals that are your trainers be as good as you were. And that's a little bit different of a skill set, because you have to approach it with a little bit of humility to say, I can't be the best. If I want to be the best, then I'm going to limit myself. I need to make my staff the best. They have to be better than me, and then I'm going to be successful. And so I find that's, again, you can see that in Korea, where typically what ends up happening is a little bit of ego gets involved, and these trainers are like, no, I'm the best trainer. Like, I will be the best trainer, even though I'm the gym owner. And then you have to kind of overcome that ego a little bit and be like, look, if you want to make this scalable, you have to focus on how do I improve myself as not only a leader, but a manager. And then, develop my PT trainers or my freelancers, whoever, to be able to increase their capability to become these superstars so that my business can rise.
Mm-hmm. That being said, would you say that the rate at which you expand, like, for example, it would have taken you a long time from like number one to number two, now it's speeding up, right? Because you now have that infrastructure in place.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. I think for us, location number one was tough. And then it was tough from going from 1 to 2. Mm-hmm. But once you got to 3, then it was like so much easier. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, like, the reason why number 1 was tough was it was a lot of just learning. Yeah. You have this expectation, it's very high. Mm-hmm. And then next thing you know, something, because, like, for instance, when we first started, we thought, hey, all of our employees are going to treat them so well. They're going to love us. They're going to be so loyal. And we did that. We were like dinners, like, taking them to our house, like having barbecue, doing these things. And then, 3 months down the road, you're like noticing that your one trainer's like sleeping instead of making customer phone calls. He's just like sleeping during work hours. And you're like, okay, we have to have this conversation. And the next thing you know, he's just like, I hate you guys. And we're like,
I think really, like, people management is just like the toughest part of like running a business, I feel like. And then, especially with your military background. In your opinion, just because, given your unique background, how you have to just like really motivate a lot of people to perform at their best, sometimes for their life, but at the same time, just to excel at what they do so that we can, we all benefit and we all grow. But what do you think is the best way to motivate your employees or your franchisees or trainers? Do you have any kind of a secret that you've acquired over the years that you could apply?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough question to answer. And what I say by is, like, I used to think, like, I came from this, coming from, a Green Beret into like a top MBA program at Columbia. You're with these level of individuals that are just pretty elite in their own type of way. Yeah. And so people are naturally motivated towards some objective. And then coming out of that to, like, then being able to be like, why are you not motivated? Like, what can I do to get you there?
Which I would argue is 99% of the population.
Yeah, I would.
Because you're describing like 1%.
Exactly. Yeah.
Columbia, Green Beret, but these are not the
normal everyday person.
So,
but then you also, you have to go back and you have to understand that it's like, okay, like, look, I was in this environment, but that's not everybody. Yeah. So that is maybe the top 1%. I was classified in this category, but the reality is I have to level with these people who they don't have those intrinsic motivation.
Exactly. So then what level.
Do you do? And so what you have to do is say, in those situations I think the best thing you can do is just level with them a little bit and just, try to understand what does motivate them. Because the reality is, people really like to push money as a motivator or promotions as a motivator, but sometimes that doesn't motivate people. And so you have to then say, okay, hey, can I talk to this individual? Can I talk to this person? And then just really find out what motivates them. But you can't just go like, hey, what motivates you? Like, you have to actually develop the relationship with them enough for them to feel comfortable enough to tell you, hey, because you have some individuals who maybe they're ashamed by what motivates them. Maybe security motivates them. Security meaning they want to just have a 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 job, and they want to just stay at that for the next 10, 15 years. And then that's what motivates them. And they want to they want to be part of a team that is just like fun, and they don't have any aspirations to grow. Yeah. And so
is that what you find mostly in Korean entrepreneurs or like potential franchisees who come to you and say, I want to make this happen?
I would say
it's like a cultural difference there somewhere.
I would say, not in the franchisees themselves, because I feel like naturally the franchisees are a little bit more. They're a little bit more than your average Korean employee. But I would say average Korean employee versus American average employee. What I find is people are a little bit more performance driven here, and then people in Korea are a little bit more team driven. And what I mean by that is like in the US, because it's a little bit of a dog eat dog, like individual performance, like you want your individual performance to really shine so that you can get that promotion. Whereas Korea, I feel like the society is structured around like collectivism. And so therefore, whenever somebody in the team has success, it's more like a shared success. Also, when somebody has a failure, it's the team's failure and it's shared, which I found very confusing. And I'll bring a key example is our first location. The US incentive structure for coaches is usually, hey, if you can do sales, I'll pay per sale you get. So like you get some commission, you know, per member you sign up, and we tried that incentive. And actually here, and you know, you had a couple individuals that were pretty happy about it, but actually what ended up happening is we tried it for 3 months, and the team unsolicited, the team came to us as a team, came to me and my wife and said, hey, this is too much pressure on the team. It's creating this weird dynamic. Can we just change it to 회식비? Like I want to have company dinner fund for like the team.
Wow, that's interesting.
And so I was just like, I was very confused, you know, as an individual, because I'm like,
so wait, they don't want that individual commission, but what will motivate them more to go make sales is if they can socialize more with their team.
Yeah, and then we just switched it, and actually the performance increased. And so for me, I was just like, okay, like I'm confused.
Wow, I'm surprised to hear that. Maybe I'm not Korean enough in that sense, but then again, even in any given team, there's always that superstar who makes up for the rest anyway, right?
Yeah, and that ends up being the case too, just naturally. And then what we find too is like, so we've now kind of structured it where there is a little bit of team incentive is the majority of it, and then there's a little bit of individual incentive. And then one thing we found very effective is just like call outs, like recognition, especially like company-wide recognition. So like the more people that know like, oh, this person did a good job, it's kind of like a pride thing that just ends up helping so much.
Right. And you just figured all this out through just like practice and then just testing things
trial and error. Because I mean, there's some employees that it's not that, you know, they were bad employees. It's just we couldn't find the right way to motivate them. And so we parted ways, and I look back on it and I'm like, man, I did a terrible job with this person. I could have probably done it this way, and then they would be more motivated. But because the way it worked out in our management at the time, it's just like they felt not motivated, and they're like, okay, this is not going anywhere.
Right.
We managed to find people that did fit and did kind of work with our team, and so we've been able to kind of adjust and still grow. But that's that constant learning process. It's just kind of seeing, okay, hey, you know, I think most people expect everything to be linear, but the reality is nothing in life is. It's always, you know, peaks and troughs. And so you just have to manage that so that it does continue to grow, and understand that you are going to hit a low, you're going to hit a high, and just, it's not going to always be a high. So expect a low coming, and then be prepared for it.
What do you say to those people who say, you know what, I'm smart. I want to start a business. I really want to get into the franchise business, whether it be in Korea, in any other Asian countries. And like, what do you say to those people? Like, what do you think, is this the industry where you feel like anybody who's driven, who's smart, they can be successful? Do they need to come in with a certain type of mindset? Maybe this is something that pays like a dividend long term, but you got to put in like a hard yard in the first 5 years. Because how long have you been doing, you know, I mean, but it hasn't, that's the surprising part. Because up until, you know, I mean, I had a chat with you beforehand, but like, if people on the outside just looking in, they'll say, wow, you know, okay, so you get here in like a 2-3 years or 4 years. When most people don't really see all the groundwork that you laid out for, like, I don't know, 10 years or something like that. So what do you say to those people who are like looking for relatively quick success?
I guess it depends on what you mean by quick. I think the reality is in those situations, it's like there is kind of ways to get rich quick out there. Gambling, maybe crypto, but then there's risk associated with that. I think it depends on your risk appetite. So you can go out there, and if you are somebody that's able to assume risk quite a bit, then there is an upside to that. And it's baked into the capital markets. You know, if you're very, very low risk, then you can put some money into stock market, ETF, or treasury funds, and then you can say, okay, hey, stock market, if I just put in an ETF, I can expect a 5%, 6% return year on year. And then I'm fine with that because I have low risk appetite. If you want to get a little bit more risky, then you can say, okay, let me do a mix of stocks, bonds, so on and so forth. And then I want to really bet into this one company. And then, but the reality is it can go up or it can go down pretty drastically. Same with crypto, same with going to the casino and putting on red or black, And so it's one of those things where I find value in business is like, one, you control it. So you can say, okay, I have this much money, I want to invest this much money. And so that's my risk appetite. And then the one thing I like that's a little bit step forward with franchising is that it's already a proven business model. So that reduces the risk.
Right.
And so you can say, hey, even though I'm paying this fee, this royalty fee for this franchise, it's de-risked in the sense that like, hey, it's a proven business model. I know it's successful. So then it's my confidence in myself to be able to execute based off these best practices. And then I think
plus they get guidance as well.
Exactly. And you get ongoing guidance. If you're really struggling, it's not only do you get guidance from the headquarters, but then you have a network of franchisees that you can reach out to and say, hey, like I notice you're crushing it over here. Like what are you doing? Like what is wrong with me? What is so great about you? And then figure it out. And so I think people that are pursuing entrepreneurship, I think they have to kind of decide like what is their path to entrepreneurship. And I think you have to really determine like how much control you want versus how much control you're willing to give up. If you want all the control, then franchising is probably not right for you because, we've had a few franchisees that come in and they think that, like I bought this license, now I can do whatever with the brand. And the reality is like, no, franchises, like you sign an agreement with franchising so that you don't hurt the network. So you say, hey, you can't do X, Y, Z. You can't just take the logo and make it to something else. You can't go collaborate with this brands without these approvals. You can't change the way the look and feel of the studio looks because like this is what the customers come in and expect. And this is standardized. So like, we want to keep it this way and protect the brand. And that's what you're paying for this business model. And so that we also protect that from happening in other cases. Whereas if you want to just go make your own brand, you have all the control, you can do that. So it has to be kind of like a self-reflection time to say, I have all these great ideas and I want the 100% authority to be able to do them without any restrictions in place, then create your own brand.
Right.
If you want a proven business model, a little bit less risk, but unfortunately there's kind of a left and a right guard post that you can't, you can only operate within this. You can't push limits. Even if you think it's a good idea, you're stuck in there. Yeah. But the reality is there's been people doing this for years and years and they clearly define like, hey, this is the proper way to do it. And this is what has been successful. So if you do this and you do it well, you will be successful. And so I think you have to kind of determine what characteristics you want to go for. And then kind of deliver on that.
I feel like there was some master class on how to run a franchise model. I guess one thing I forgot to ask was the whole what's a typical industry standard, like a loyalty payment to the franchisor? Is it like what percentage are we looking at?
I mean, I think across most brands, it depends. Kind of like you have restaurant brands, service brands.
Right. Yeah.
And so it varies, but generally you'll see a range of anywhere from like 5 to 10%.
Oh, wow. That's pretty good because again, considering what you get in return, and the proven business model aspect, I can see the appeal. Until now, I just had no idea about the franchise business. It's good to learn about it, first of all.
Yeah.
But for whoever's listening who might be interested, like how should they get in touch with you? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram. I can give you contact information.
Yeah. And what's next for Joe? You know, you're just like killing it right now. So
yeah, I think our business in Korea is like, I think, for us, we want to continue to expand, continue to grow the business. I really love my staff and my team that we built here, and I want to be able to provide them greater opportunity. And the best way for us to do that is to continue to grow. And so our next step is to kind of introduce more brands into Korea, but also we're looking at overseas expansion.
Wow.
So we
like,
want to.
Which country?
So we're looking at the U.S. We're going to open up the U.S. market, have kind of like a Korea office, a U.S. office, and we can try to trade brands across. And the main reason for that is, access to resourcing in the U.S. is just so much more abundant than it is in Korea. And I think if I had the resource capability in the U.S. and in Korea, then I would be able to be much larger than we are, but we've been very, very constrained and limited. And so we want to open that up a little bit, hence the need to kind of push more.
I see. Lastly, I guess, what would be sort of like the biggest piece of advice you would offer to anyone wanting to come to Korea to start a business as a foreigner?
I think the biggest piece of advice is, again, you have to come in with a little bit of an open mind and patience, because things are not going to work the way it does in your home country. They're just not.
Yeah.
And
so the downside is that even though there are a lot of opportunities, you just gotta be a little bit more patient.
Yeah, you have to be a little bit more patient. And then, I think having a Korean partner, Korean staff is absolutely critical. Just to be able to kind of finesse some of the things that you're going to need. And I think that's kind of, I guess, the very, very simple, but the two biggest pieces of advice. And then just have the perseverance. Like, again, you have to be patient. And then a lot of people are going to probably put you down. And a lot of people are going to tell you it's not going to be successful. But if you truly believe and you have the passion for it, you have to persevere through that. And you have to push past. Otherwise, you give up before you even get started. So I think if you can persevere and kind of push through, then you can really seize the opportunity and be successful.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. I think that's something that even I take for myself, how important it is to just persevere and then just not quit, like just not give up. And I think sometimes that's like the hardest part, but it's also the most rewarding part.
Yeah, and I think, exactly. It's the most rewarding because you get put in these very, very tough situations. And because it was such a tough situation, when you come out of it, there's so much more appreciation, that much sweeter.
No, it's really awesome to hear about your experience. And thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah. And hopefully we get to talk to you again soon about other interesting things about Korea. But
I'll be here for some time. So
cool. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you.